I have to fix one thing, sorry.
No problem.
Oh, we're good.
So we figured the administrative piece of this evening first, because the agenda didn't go up in time for fully proper notice. So I'd like to first motion to add to the agenda a presentation by Jubilee Housing. Excellent. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Wonderful. Then I think we can move on to our now formal agenda item. I see Marty on there, and I'm sorry it's a small crowd tonight, Marty, but I know I will really appreciate having the opportunity to do more Q&A, given the presentation you shared with me directly was really informative, but I know we didn't really have time to discuss it. So appreciate you coming tonight to share it with the rest of the committee too.
Hi guys, Benjamin, how are you? Haven't seen you in a while. I understand there was a shooting up the block from you on Saturday night, right? Someone got shot in the face.
Yeah,
Did they catch the guy yet?
I haven't heard any details.
Yeah. Well, I think we all knew that something was going to happen on that street. It was too much activity.
Marty,
So am I on? What's that?
it's just a quick comment. That sure is it walk to prevent suicide by any chance? Or
Yeah.
fight suicide. Were you at the walk on Sunday?
You know, I wasn't. I have a really good friend who's an 18-year-old took his life by suicide about 3 years ago. So I've walked a couple different times with them, and
It was good. I was there.
one of these kind of sad, just sad moments. This kid I knew growing up, he grew up with my kids, and he was just one of these off the chart nice kids, but he had demons, and he just couldn't see it. His dad found him in their basement hanging.
Well, I like the shirt. Yeah, it's hard. Tough subject, important subject. Yeah.
It is a tough one. Okay, so I'm gonna just, I've done this with you couples. I'm gonna do a little more quick one through this PowerPoint that I've used in the past, and then is that right? Would that work?
That's me. I
Yes, sure.
definitely have questions, but for the sake of the couple folks we have on the line who probably haven't seen the presentation, let's.
Well, you've seen it, Peter, right? And you have not been, right? So I'll do the real quick version, and then we'll spend some time on some of the questions you asked, Celeste. All right?
Awesome.
Can I screen share?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
How's my? Where's it at? Oh, there it is. All right. Can you guys see that? Yes. So let me just go through this quick one, and then we'll get into some of the projects and details of that. So this is us at Jubilee Housing. We are, we call ourselves Justice Housing because we are deeply affordable in a high quality neighborhood with amenities and services. So that's kind of how we've been defining our mission. This is an overview of our Maycroft project that got closed, finished up, closed after many years of development, 64 units on the corner of Columbia Road and 15th Street. This is who we are. We've been around about 40 years. We do deeply affordable housing with services. Most of our buildings have some level of support services on the ground floor. It's kind of like, retail. We added amenities, but our amenities are different than market amenities. So we have childcare programs, Jubilee Jumpstart in our Ontario building, and then Martha's Table in the Maycroft building. And then we have youth out of school time program services in a couple of our other buildings. So we add some services as well as some just support for our residents. So we have about 100 residents kind of participate in our program. We have about 500 some residents who live in our buildings. This is our footprint. You can see Maycroft all the way over here. We'll talk a little bit about Euclid Street on the other side of 16th Street. And the rest of our residential properties are right, south of Columbia Road. We have two other properties that are for returning citizens, one for men, one for women, one on 18th Street in front of Trist, and the other on Ontario on the other side of Columbia Road. We often don't put them in just for purposes of privacy. And that's the big picture of Jubilee. And so let's go talk about what most folks are interested in, which is the developments. So we have two projects that are heading towards renovation. 1724 Kalorama and 1460 are a combined project. You can see there's 25 units in each. Kalorama is closest to you guys. It's right around the corner, right in the corner of Ontario and Kalorama. It's the old Trans-Century building. We bought it about 3 years ago. We have done all the redesign of it. There'll be 9 1s, 7 2s, 9 3s. We're going to put our headquarters on top in a penthouse, and then on the bottom floor on the right, Sitar is going to take the whole ground floor condo. And because they have been dying, up until pandemic, they were just bursting at the seams. Hopefully post-pandemic that will continue, and they wanted to expand some of their services for more of the older kids and young adults who are doing different kinds of technology and art kind of things. Anyway, so and Maureen, who runs Sitar, she's in the process of raising the capital to buy her condo. So that's that one. And then the 1460 Euclid is a TOPA deal, tenant opportunity to purchase. Tenants assigned it to us a couple of years ago. We're going to combine these two in one project because it's just more efficient. So construction will happen at the same time. And the 1460, you can see 11 1s, 7 2s, 5 3s, and we're going to put 4 bedrooms, which no one is building in the city at all anymore. There are not many 3s either. And this is partly because the city is just, especially for low income folks who've got extended families, there just isn't any large apartments. So we're going to add some into these projects. So time-wise on these two, designs done. We applied twice to the housing department for money to fix it up. We buy it first and we fix it up, and then we get the money to fix it up. We lost both times, and then in March of this year, when the city had a little more money, they approved our project. So we are heading towards a closing. It'll probably happen in December or January. In the world of housing, we have every housing department that operates in the city is part of these buildings. So DHCD will put in housing production trust fund money. We'll having tax credits, 4% tax credits from the DC Housing Agency. And then we're going to have about 25, or I think it's 30 LRSP rental subsidies split between these two buildings. And that's from the DC Housing Authority. So when you get one of these closings that's got every agency, they all touch it. Every lawyer in the city touches it. Just the way it is, and everyone's got to. So that's pretty much that's going to happen, and we think about a year, maybe 14 months of construction. On the Kalorama, which is of most interest to you guys, because the second and floor are like 20-foot floors. So very sealing the roof. We're going to be able to add another floor there and then add a penthouse. You can see the gray on top, and you can see a penthouse on top of that. We're going to, and we're still within, the standard zoning codes. We will, I think some of you were around, we have a zoning adjustment that happened about 3 years ago. We by law, we would have been required to have 7 parking spaces, and we asked for an exception so that we could put the Sitar Center in there. So that went through you all through the ANC back about 3 years ago. Got a unanimous decision, and then went to the BZA, and they gave us the approval of that. So we don't have to do any parking at all. And actually, the neighborhood will pick up a couple of parking spaces, because right now, if you look in front of the Kalorama building, there's a couple of curb cuts, because in the old days, to go in the Kalorama building, the whole ground floor was a parking lot. So those two cuts had about possibly 3 or 4 parking spaces that'll get returned to the neighborhood because we won't need those parking cuts anymore. They will be returned as metered parking. We did work with the community a little bit to see if we could get what's it called? I forget what the word is. Residential parking, kind of fully residential, but because there are some commercial operations that happen down there, they were not in, they wanted to make sure there was some amount of metered parking. So it's going to stay the same as it is. I'll just add a couple of meters down there. So that's that project. So why don't I stop there and see if there's any questions on any, because this is one that's moving faster, and see if there's any questions. Then I'll talk about the next set of projects. Any questions? No. Okay.
No questions, just very excited to see the progress.
Yeah. Well, it'll be nice. And I will say we're not, for the Calorama, we're not demo that. We're just going to go up and fix it up. So we won't have, and we're not going to go down underground. So we're not going to disturb the soil as much. So for those who know, when you disturb soil in the city, you know what you get? You get rats. Next one, the next question we're going to have some rats in the next one. All right. So this is our, so this is the other project that's in the works. That's kind of in process right now. So 23, 26, 23, 338, we bought 2 years ago. These are the 5 buildings. There's 2 townhouses and about 4 crappy buildings right in front of Mary Center. So we bought them from a developer who had pulled them together into a package, and we negotiated and purchased it from them probably about 1.5 years ago. No, about 2 years ago. And so those are going to get all demoed. And then we're going to go back up with about 52 units of housing. Most of it will be for pretty low income residents. You can see 31 to 30% AMI. We haven't completely finished the configuration, but it's mostly going to be, we won't have any 4s. It's probably going to be some number of 1s, 2s, and a couple 3s and a few efficiencies. But we haven't kind of finished design on that. But it's probably going to be about 52 units because that's what we can do per the size of the building. We're going to have on-site property management and some support services, and then we're going to add urban farming. So this will be the new thing for I was telling Celeste the other day, my boss Jim Knight likes new and shiny things, and so we're going to get a new and shiny thing here. So we're going to put on the ground floor of the Ontario place, we're going to add, I think it's about 6,000 square foot on the ground floor will be what's called aquaponics. So a couple of big tanks of fish poop, that water gets used to, it's kind of a closed system, and we'll be growing probably lettuce, basil, different kinds of spices. I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at right now. We'll use grow lights, same kind you guys all use when you're growing your pot in your bathroom, those kind of grow lights. Except we got the high-end ones. And you can grow this stuff fast. So my guess, we've done some market research. It's probably going to be greens, lettuce, things like that. So that's the ground floor. On the roof, we're also going to put, you can see, we're going to put some greenhouses on the roof in a couple of different locations, and we'll be growing up there as well. So the same concept, and the idea is we'll be able to grow, a bunch of lettuce and different kinds of some vegetables, and some of that will feed the next project, just so we will use it and we will eat it, and the rest we'll probably sell to the market, either to busboys and poets. We may, we're looking at some farmers markets to sell this. And we are going to be putting a commercial kitchen in the building next door, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is the King Emmanuel Baptist Church. And that commercial kitchen will be used to feed our residents in that building. But we will have extra time. So we are planning to do some, we have a guy that ran a commercial catering company that's doing some consulting with us. And he says you got to go for high-end basil. You can grow a pile of not basil, but pesto. So we are kicking around the idea of growing up a lot of basil, doing all kinds of cool, there's lots of different pesto combinations. You freeze it and you take it to his farmer's market and you sell it. He's got a friend, he says they just sell out every weekend. So, we haven't figured all that out, but that's kind of the idea. So on the right here is the King Emmanuel Baptist Church. You all know what that is, right? It's right in the corner of Calorem and Ontario. We bought that about a year and a half ago from the community, and they are, we're going to do 6 single rooms in like 3 suites, and then a couple of staff positions. This will be for returning citizens who are immediately returning from incarceration. So there's a lot of, we'll have our staff that will be 24/7. We will having, these are residents that are, want to get better. We do a lot of screening before they come in. We'll have a commercial kitchen on site, and we have an expectation for those residents to be working in both the aquaponics and the kitchen, as well as just kind of rebuilding their lives going forward. So that's going to happen there. So let me see if there's anything else that would. Let me just say, kind of go back a minute, just say, you had asked a couple of questions, Celeste, that let me just respond to them. And one of your questions is, what makes these projects work? And how do you make them work? And I will say 3 things that I think are essential. First, you have to have a commitment to do it. Affordable housing doesn't happen unless there's a lot of commitment to do it, because the market housing, as you know, is just so strong. And so pushing up against that's rock is hard. So you need an organization that wants to do it. They got to have passion for this mission, because when you try to do housing for people that are either returning citizens or just deeply affordable, is a lot more work than just market housing. And it's even much more work than just affordable housing at a much higher level. And so you need to have some experience as well. And, for Jubilee, we've been doing this for 40 years. We manage our own properties. We have good consultants that help us think through zoning and engineering and architecture and all that kind of stuff. And you need that. The other big thing you need to make this work is money. And there's different kinds of money that you need to make it work. So the first part, you need to be able to buy and control the property. So one of the things you need is acquisition money. You usually can't get that from public sources. You have to get it from private sources. The public sources will take out the private at some point, but at the beginning, you got to borrow it. So we borrow from a bank. We borrow from a couple of nonprofit intermediaries, like a group called LISC or Enterprise. I used to work at LISC a number of years ago. And then usually when you do this, any of those institutions want to see the developer put some of their own skin in the game. So we have to put some percentage of any acquisition in that's ours. So a couple of years ago, we created a justice housing fund, just kind of a Delaware-based standard, fund that anyone else could set up. And people get a return, like a 2% return, and investors who have high net wealth will give us money, and we'll use that to help, put in our share of the money. The second one is construction permanent financing, which is what we are in the run right now with Housing Production Trust Fund. So, you may or may not know that the housing department of the city puts out a NOFA once every couple of years or once a year. So they just put out their request for proposals about 3 weeks ago. It's due in December. And so we are in the run to apply for this money for these two, for the Ontario project. And we're going to compete with everyone else in the city. We think we have a good shot. There's about 400 million in there for projects. There is, there's a fair amount of what's called local rent supplement program, which is rental subsidies for really low income folks, which is who we're going to serve. And we need those to make it work. And the NOFA that the city put out makes some priorities around serving lower income folks. And they kind of said one of the neighborhoods of the city, which is our neighborhood, they want to prioritize to try to push some of this housing. So this is the city's way of kind of prioritizing where they want to send their money. And so we are, so soft money is also needed in these projects. So that's the Housing Production Trust Fund. For us, when that money comes in, it helps to pay for some acquisition and some construction. And what happens is the city gets to throw a covenant on that building. When they put their money in, they want to keep that building permanently affordable for 40 to 60 years. So we agree to that because that's what we do for business. And for the city, what it allows them to do is to tie up these properties for deep affordability or for affordability. That's what they get out of it. And so when you take their money, that's kind of the quid pro quo. You got to keep. And so even if we, for example, if we went under and another developer or another owner came in, they would still have to play by those rules. And that's how the city that's how they put their money at. And then we, again, I mentioned I work because we will have about 30 of these units will be deeply affordable. We can't do it without rental subsidies. And so when the mayor approved the budget this year, she approved a fair amount of new rental subsidies called local rent supplement program. And so we will compete with, everyone else in the city for these. And our hope is that we would get approved. The due date is in December. They're saying they're going to make a decision by February. It's never happened before, but whatever, that's what they say. So we're hoping that, and so if that happened, and if we were selected, we would probably we would probably close by the end of next year and then move into construction in the first or second quarter of 2023. So let me stop there. And then just, the one other thing, what do you need? Or the other question you would ask, Celeste, was, what can neighbors do to support this? I'll just give a couple for, from a Jubilee perspective. One is just to be a neighbor in voice in support of conclusion. Often when you get development, the loudest voices are those who want to stop everything. The NIMBYs, I don't want this is fine. So I think just being a voice for that, we are a society that, tries to invite everyone in, and we're trying to create space for everybody. And so this, being a voice at the ANC or with your neighbors is a really big help. Another piece is just general advocacy at the city level for legislation and budgets that support opportunities for people to come into good neighborhoods. And so that could be support for a budget that says, I'm going to put a bunch of money into affordable housing. It could also be legislation that tries to lower barriers. So you may or may not know that we just got legislation passed a couple of years ago that a landlord can't ask up front, for example, if you've been have a criminal record. You can only ask it after you've made an offer, after you've checked the person out. And you can't just deny someone without some amount of grounds. That's a relatively new law. So for years, you could come in and try to get a unit and you just get denied right away because you don't have a criminal record. There's the other issue is that, for a long time, different licensing agencies in the city said, if you want to be a carpenter, or if you want to be a hairdresser, or if you want to be a plumber, you can't have a criminal record. So, what would happen is you create these barriers. So people come out, especially for people coming out of incarceration, you create all these barriers. So they can't fit in, they can't find job, they can't work. And so they go back to what they did before. We're beginning to fight to lower those barriers, and some legislation passed last year that they're starting to take away some of those licensing requirements, especially the ones that don't make any sense. It's one thing if a bank says, I'm not going to hire an embezzler, there's a logic to that. But if someone has done some kind of fraud and they just want to be a barber, there's no real logic to why that particular crime has to do with that particular profession. So trying to eliminate some of those barriers is another piece. And then the last one I'll say is just being aware of, trying to understand the difference between what we want and what your needs are, and what your interests are, and what are wider needs or wider interests. And I would, the one I can comment on is parking. So parking is important to a neighborhood, and I get that. But like in our case, we had to do 7 parking spaces in the Calorama in this one previous building. And, if you were just into your very narrow self-interest, you would say, I want parking at all costs. And if the cost is I'm going to lose some affordable housing, so be it. So I think what's important is to try to balance out, you have your narrow self-interest, and then there's the wider, kind of a citywide or neighborhood self-interest that says sometimes we got to give up a little bit to get something. And so in our case, to get affordable housing, sometimes you have to give up a little bit. So just trying to be a voice for those who may never be able to come back in without, some people in the neighborhood saying, welcome them back in. So let me stop there and answer questions.
That was really great. Thank you so much. I had not thought about things like complementary barriers that have to be lowered for affordable housing to pay off. That's a really useful takeaway for me. I'm curious, does the potential building come first, or does the money come first, or do they both have to line up kind of perfectly for things to happen? And then I'll let my fellow commissioners ask questions too.
Well, so to do affordable housing, you can't compete with public money unless you have site control. So, which means you have to, in this city, given the competition, you have to almost, there are different ways to have site control. One is you can have a contract that says, I'll buy it if I get the money. Typically, you are not going to compete well with public money for that. It is considered site control, but it's weak site control. Real site control is you own it. And so for groups like Jubilee, you have to actually buy it. And then and that's a big risk because, so we bought some of these buildings. We spent $12 million. We're paying debt service on them right now. If it doesn't come to pass, we're in trouble. And so you have to have an organization that's willing to take some risks at the front end. And again, with organizations who've done this before, you have some experience, you have some idea what will possible, but it's not a guarantee. And, so we bought all these 4 buildings over the last couple of years, spent close to 40 million. And we haven't gotten to the place where we are actually putting them back into production because it takes a couple years because you got to get the money from the city. So you really have to own it before. So you need money for that, Celeste. And then you got to design it and you got to pay your architects and you got to pay your zoning and do all that stuff. And then you apply and then you hope to give us some money. And you hope that you have built it enough so that when you start operating it, you have enough money to operate the building. So but you can't, if you're not willing to take a risk and get out there and control it and buy it first, you'll just never develop it because, all these buildings that I just mentioned, they would have just gone market if we hadn't stepped in.
Peter?
Excellent presentation, great updates. I always love to hear what you're doing. I had a question on something that we talked about previously, about some of the rent programs and that the lack of kind of the city getting money out to kind of help in terms of some of the recovery dollars and things like that. And I was just wondering if you had any update, if there are still issues that you're seeing in actually getting the money in people's hands.
So you're talking about Stay DC. So Stay DC was the program the city used with ARPA money to provide rental assistance to residents who were affected by COVID. When we talked last, the city was doing a lousy job, and I think they got religion sometime in July, and today was the last day you could apply for any kind of Stay DC money. The city is almost the best in the country right now. They've gotten almost all their money out the door, and the money that hasn't been out the door is fairly well committed. So that's the ARPA money. Okay. And so they were pretty bad for a while, but that has shifted and the money's out. And, and I will speak from a Jubilee perspective. We were pushing at the beginning, and finally, they began to shift and just make it more available and not make it just they lowered a lot of the red tape. We probably have 100 of our residents that have been deeply impacted by COVID. And we've gotten, I don't think we've gotten any denials at all from the city on this. There is another about 15 million that's available that was approved by the city council in this past budget round. So that's just the standard rent assistance that's been available, for years. It's got a different set of guidelines. It's managed by Housing Counseling Services and a couple other nonprofits, and that is available. But the city got the money out the door, and both for landlords and tenants, and took a while, but they did it.
Great to hear, and thanks for the update.
Yeah, I think we're like the easiest audience. We always love everything you're up to, but that's because you do great work. Just like one quick question, and if this is a bad question or impossible to answer, just say that. But I'm just curious, like, I know it varies a lot, but in your experience, what kind of timelines have you seen in terms of what's been very long from like expressing initial interest in a property to being able to have tenants with keys in their hands? And what is kind of the short end of like, what's that spectrum like? And how has that changed over time at all?
And the best answer is it depends. So it depends, number one, on the quality of the building to start with, because usually if for us, we tend to buy buildings that are on the downside and need major renovation. So anytime you're doing a major renovation, you're probably looking at a 12 to 18 month construction period. I mean, if you're doing, new construction, you're probably about the same, but if you're demoing, taking it down to the studs, that's what you're looking at. So that's a time frame that always exists if you're doing major renovation. If the building's in pretty good shape and you're doing minor stuff, you could probably cut that to 6 months. The depends is also who you're renting to, Peter. So if I'm renting to really low income folks, I need some rental subsidies. So then I'm going to the housing authority to get those. And so that, sometimes it's coordinated and sometimes it just takes a long time to get that done. And that could take, 5 to 6 months to get done. Because you have to purchase, as I mentioned to Celeste, you got to purchase first. Then you have to get in line with the city. And that, so that's, and again, if you need Housing Production Trust Fund or rental subsidies, you have to get in line, and that could take, often like the HCD typically would take almost 8 months to make a decision. So like, for example, the last RFP was in September of 19. The first group got approved in June of the following year. So in that interim period, properties, sometimes they're operating because there's people living in them. Sometimes they're just empty and they're sitting there. So it just takes, and once you get approved from the city, it's another 6 to 8 months to get through all the regulatory stuff. And, again, typically if you have multiple sources of funding, if you have bank financing, LIHTC financing, low-income housing tax credit, investors, it just, there's every source may add a month or so. So it's not a short-term process, unfortunately. And, the need is there from day one. It just takes, a while to get it done. And then, and then you never know, you run into stuff, when you're doing old buildings, when we did the Maycroft, we thought we knew what we were going. Once you pull the walls out, we found stuff that added another couple of months that we just didn't see. You usually build in, larger contingencies, both money and time, when you're doing major renovation of older buildings. It's probably a little different for new stuff because you can limit your contingencies.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful. I mean, I know a lot of projects, housing and otherwise, often get that kind of, it takes a while, and it's always helpful for just to kind of get a better look at what each of those, I mean, the ideal would be to get people from each of the agencies and institutes that deal with each of those and then ask what takes them so long, but
and I will say that years ago, there was this, especially in the world of housing subsidies and the trust fund, where you would go to the housing department to get your trust fund dollars, and then they would give you a contingency. If you needed rental subsidies, they would give you a contingency until you went over to the housing authority, and you'd have separate applications, separate timelines, and each of them would be saying the same thing. Well, I don't want to approve it until they approve it. And the other one would say, well, I'm not going to approve it until they approve it. So about 6 years ago, we pushed hard as a citywide coalition to create a consolidated RFP. So now the housing department is the major place where you go through to get your rentals, get your housing production trust fund and any other subsidy dollars, and they control the LRSPs, some housing choice vouchers, other rental subsidies. A couple other agencies give some capital. So for people who were with mental illness, they would have a pot of money for, to kind of dedicate, and there'd be some PSH in there as well, permanent supportive housing. So they did do a consolidated RFP. So it's much shorter than it used to be. It's still long.
Thank you so much.
Peter, Brian, questions?
When are elections coming up? Come next week?
Yeah, for the special election, it's on November 3rd.
Okay, I knew it was coming up, Jake.
Yep. Marty, as you know, it's great to see you. We've had the pleasure of speaking a couple of times and me getting to see these projects over the last couple of weeks. I'm very appreciative of that and extremely supportive of the work that y'all are doing. I have spoken with a couple of neighbors since and just had a couple of things. Don't shoot the messenger, but one of the neighbors just asked if we please make sure that if it's going to take a while for the development, especially of the stuff on the corner of Champlain and Calorama, we can just make sure that we've got regular cleaning taking place of the sidewalk and kind of the local area around there.
Yep.
And I did have a question posed to me whether or not, and I realized that we hadn't actually discussed this, of whether or not for either of those developments on that corner, we've already done whatever variances that were going to take place for the new Calorama.
Right.
But for the one on Calorama in Ontario, whether or not there you will be seeking any sort of variances for the current designs.
Nope, they're all built as of right.
It's great. Cool. I thought that was right, and that is how I said I'm pretty sure that that's the case, but I just wanted to make sure I checked with you one more time.
Yeah, no, that's all right. And I would just, I guess also just to say that we're having a staff change. Dorothy Larimer has been our vice president for property management for, about 15 years, and she is moving on in a couple of days. So if there are, just as you said, Jake, if you are seeing stuff like I was over at Ontario today, looking, we were looking at some stuff, and I went around the back in the alley, and people dump stuff there all the time. So there was a mattress and a bunch of crap. So we are regularly taking that out. But if any of you hear of stuff like that, Jake, that needs some help, contact me for now. At some point when we're doing some staff restructuring, we will. Typically our vice president of property management takes care of all that stuff and makes sure her people are going out there. But in the in-between, till we get, kind of pinned down who's next, let me know. If there are stuff like I know now, I'm going to get our staff to take away the junk that someone threw in the alley sometime the last couple of days. But if there are other things in other properties, generally where our properties are. If you're hearing stuff, let me know, because we want to be good neighbors, and sometimes we just don't hear you. If we hear it from you all, we'll take care of it.
Will do, Marty, and thank you so much. You guys are great neighbors.
You mind if I ask now, Celeste?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. When I'm not hosting ANC meetings, I'm a reporter at Street Sense.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so, and I also have some background in housing policy.
Yep.
I'm very curious to hear what you think how you think the city's done creating deeply affordable housing using tools like HPTF and now that they're trying to match it with LRSP. Something we've struggled with and covered is that there are these legislative goals they have of a certain percentage of HPTF going to that deeply affordable category. but it seems like all of these projects that are being subsidized on the supply side, whether it's 100% or less, it's they're creaking up to 80% or even that workforce category. And it's, do you know why? Are they not getting good enough proposals? I mean, it's hard to, I don't want to besmirch you, but like, if you're at DHCD or these agencies that review these proposals for funding, I just don't, it's hard to imagine how they don't get enough deserving proposals where a very large percentage of the fund would go to like strictly deeply affordable family sized plans.
Right. Good questions. It's for a lot of us who do this work, that's the question of the day. I don't know if any of you saw the OIG report, came out about 2 weeks ago, actually came out in the same day when they announced the RFP. And the OIG, as well as the auditor a couple of years ago, did a little bit of a similar analysis, Gordon, where we have expectations. I mean, not expectation, we have rules that say the Housing Production Trust Fund should do X percentage of units that are at 30%, 50%, 80%. None of them go above 80%, to my knowledge. Most of it is 80% and below. And the city has not hit, I think in 10 years, I don't think they've hit the number on the 30% AMI. They just haven't hit it. So the question is why is that? So I think there's a couple of answers. One is, it's a lot easier. You can call your housing affordable at 60% AMI. You don't need subsidies. You don't need rental subsidies. You can just make it work. And so for a city who wants to, the mayor has said she wants to do, I think it's 35,000 new units by X date. And so you can do a lot more if your end goal is to get a lot more units in. When you deal with Jubilee, you're going to have fewer units, but deeper affordability. There are other private developers and some not, and for private and because private developers get this money too, right? As long as they keep it affordable, they're allowed to compete. But you could probably build, we do 25 units one of these projects, you could do 60, 70 on another one. And if at the end of the day, if your metric is just numbers and not depth of affordability, it looks good, right? The mayor says, I just did 3,000 units of affordable housing. And if 80% of them are at 60% AMI, most folks aren't pushing below that to understand what that is. So that is part of our, my job and, those of us who are in the affordability world to keep pushing, help them understand that. At the same time, I would say relative to other jurisdictions, the District of Columbia is doing much better than almost any other place in the country. It's just true. 400 million, Fairfax had a 1 cent per, a very wealthy neighbor does hardly anything. Montgomery does some of it, not anywhere near what we do. No one has LRSP. LRSP is a locally funded program that once you start it, you got to keep going, right? So you give me, if I got a unit that's going to go permanently affordable and I've got this person, it doesn't stop next year. It goes for 15 years and then it goes for another 15 years. So most jurisdictions in the country won't even look at it because it's just too expensive. We have a law that allows tenants to match a third party offer, a TOPA law. No jurisdiction has that in the country. And so I would say I have probably two answers. One, I think that we are, as a city, putting a lot of resources into affordability, creating some legislation, inclusive zoning, requirements that all projects have to have a certain amount of permanent supportive housing in them, regardless of the type of project. So there are a number of things that are trying to push in that direction, but at the same time, we are losing units to market every year. Projects move into market every year, we, for better or worse, we live in a market capital society where real estate is private unless there's something else that kind of intervenes. I do think that in the homeless world, we have done fairly good for families over the past 3 years. So there's a pretty good run of finding permanent supportive housing, PSH units, family size units, and getting families out of shelters. We have not done very good on single individuals, including the kind of people we are trying to serve, which are returning citizens. So in the homeless world, they don't look through returning citizen lens, they look through a homeless lens. But the reality is a lot of folks who are on the street, who are considered homeless, whether couch surfing or on the street, they're coming out of it some level of incarceration or so it's a mix. We keep pushing to do more. And, I think we all, from my perspective, we need to continue to push more. There was pressure on the city council last year to increase taxes on those at the top end. And, there was pushback. It finally passed so that more, because there was some concern that some of these programs, once the ARPA money goes away, that program goes away. So an attempt to try to balance some of that just deep inequality of wealth, which we have in our city and in our country. So I think that and then we just got to keep electing officials that say this is important. I think our council member has been pretty supportive of this stuff. She is, when we got pushed back on some of the returning citizen, we had a session a couple of years ago, and she stood up and said, all of us have people in our family that need to be welcomed home, including me. And I got an uncle who was in jail. And for a politician to get up and say that is, I think is pretty risky. So I think it's continued to elect people who understand this, but it is, and it's just tough to beat the market. Like all these buildings that you're looking at here, if Jubilee hadn't pushed very hard to buy them, they would all be moving to market or have already been in market. There's just no doubt about it. Because that's, it's just much easier to do market housing. Because you're going to get their money.
Yeah, I have one follow-up for you. We at Street Sense, we've been covering Talbert Street, which was an HPTF project for ownership that where there was lots of basically from the move-in point, lots of structural damage to the building. And I encourage folks to read about it because it's a really crazy story. But I'm curious, how does this affordable housing creation process differ when you're looking at the rental market versus the ownership market? Do you see it? Because I'm, in the coverage we've done, we're kind of grasping with, are there safeguards because they're giving people 30-year mortgages for which they're liable. And one of the owners, one of the person who bought it, one of the affordable units, she was, I think it was a $6,000 bill for code violations because the developers hadn't built the building. So I guess, what are things you worry about in terms of getting people to the ownership part of affordable housing?
No, that's a good question. Well, right now, there's only a couple of sources of funds to help, lower income folks move to home ownership, right? So there's HPAP and there's a couple of EPAP. There's a couple of different programs where you get, a soft second that's held for a period of time and then it burns off, so you're building a little bit of equity. One of the challenges is the amount of money you need to do on a per unit basis, as the market gets higher and higher. So years ago, it was a max of 30,000, but you could build and do a house for 150. So, it wasn't bad. Nowadays, can you buy a condo for under 400,000? And I think the max right now for HPAP is 70,000 or something like that. So one of the challenges is, how do you do this how do you do this in a way that can actually move some people to home ownership that doesn't completely overburden them? Because that's part of the issue, is you don't want to put someone in a house that within a very short time, they're just not going to have money to fix it up if something happens, right? That's almost the worst. That's just the worst. I think the question of, for us, if you're working with a nonprofit or a reputable developer, you have a better shot, not absolute, but you have a better shot that the project has done well. So, a group like Mana, who we work with all the time, they're doing some home ownership. Habitat, well, actually, there's only two. Habitat and Mana are the only two nonprofits that are doing affordable home ownership in the city. Mikasa used to do it, but they doing some co-ops, but mostly just standard home ownership for those two. And so they will work with residents and help them understand, that you have to go through home buyer classes and all that kind of stuff, so that when you get in, you have a sense of what's going on, and hopefully the construction is done right as well. And the other home ownership world is the cooperatives, right? So right around the corner from where we're building is the Champlain Court Cooperative. You guys know that one? And that's one that came as a co-op years ago, I think isn't struggling, and probably needs some help, but needs some leadership help to be able to benefit from some other sources of, and we've got a bunch of these limited equity co-ops that exist in the city that are home ownership to a certain extent, but they're not going to build a lot of equity as in a normal home. But there needs to be some real support for them, because they could, we have probably, we have a couple thousand units that got developed over the past 30 years. We want to keep them. But the home ownership piece is, I think having good classes on the front end, having a strong developer that has got some confidence. This one I think is, I don't know who the developer was in that one, Gordon, but they obviously, there are, we all know stories of developers who just do lousy jobs, and then that's both for market people, but in this case it was for some low income folks. But it's the same idea. They just do it and do it right. There are housing code violations all over the place, and they're gone, or they're bankrupt. And so then, then someone else is going to come and bail them out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marty. I know I said it was going to be a half hour, and we've kept you way longer. So thank you for sticking around. Two last questions. One, are you okay with sharing any of this presentation when we send out minutes, so that it can be shared with the public?
Yeah, let me think how I can. Let me think how to. Yes, I'm okay with it. I know that I can't email it to someone else because it's too big. It keeps getting stuck in the pipes. So there's there's some way to do that. Let me find out from someone in our internal IT world how to get it, and I'll get it to you. Is that right, Celeste?
Yeah, that's fine. And then
Okay.
I'll pass it along. And then last question. You just had a fundraiser. Are there other opportunities for the community to engage in the next month or two? Anything around the holidays?
So the holidays, yeah. So we have we have an elf store for our residents, and so and I think that you guys have a little grant source too. That's probably is that still available?
Yeah, please apply.
Yeah, we may want to do that for that, but probably the big place where for right now, we have an elf store where we try to provide some gifts to some of our residents over the holidays. And so let me touch base with my. We have a person who runs our resident services and see what are some opportunities, and also just mention again this grant source. I know it's a small amount, but a little bit of that could help. Last year during COVID, previous years we actually bought stuff, and then people came and it was actually, we call it the elf store, so the kids could come and basically buy stuff for their families at 5 cents. So it gave them a little bit of dignity that so they were actually giving a physical gift. Last year during COVID, we just couldn't do it, so we just gave out gift certificates, and we're just trying to figure out what we're going to do this year, because I just don't. I think the elf store where kids got to do stuff was nice, and it was feel good, and they actually got to do stuff, and we got some different sponsors from our corporate people. It's not as efficient as just a gift card, but it doesn't for the kids who want to give something to their parents, it doesn't help. Giving a gift card is kind of boring, but for the parents, it's a lot easier. They could get what they want. So let me find out about that, Celeste, and so the PowerPoint, and then any kind of support.
Yeah, so at the moment, I think it's through February at least. We have the greater flexibility than usual in what we can spend grant money on. So probably best to apply sooner rather than later.
Yep, yep.
Something
I
you're
can-
interested in.
No, I know. I mean, I think you had mentioned that earlier, and it's on my radar, and
Yeah.
I need to get it past my radar into the people that actually would do the
I
application.
know in the scope of spending 40 million in the last few years, $4,000 is
No, but it's good
Not a
stuff. It
lot.
helps. It helps. It helps. It helps. Helps.
Yeah.
All helps. All helps.
okay. Well, thank you so much
Yep.
for coming tonight
Yep.
and for answering all our questions.
Good
We'll
questions.
see you around the neighborhood.
And again, if you hear of stuff in the neighborhood, Jake, you hear stuff that I need to hear, send it my way. Good stuff, bad stuff. More good stuff than bad stuff, but I'll take the bad stuff too. We don't need it. We're not going to need any for our application in December. We're not going to need an ANC resolution. We'll probably need that next year if we get approved. So we won't need to come do that. But again, if there's stuff that we need to hear about, if you've got concerns, let me know. We can't fix it unless we know. And we try to keep close, but you guys are much closer than we are sometimes. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See you
Marty.
guys.
Good night, everyone.